it for any occasion. So keep patting down waiting, comics and conversation. Keep the conversation moving along. Keep reading comics, keep your local store strong. If it's hard, then it's a job for the challengers. Comics and conversation, y'all.
From Challengers Comics and Conversation in Chicago, this is Contest of Challengers.
This is going to be weird. This is a little bit different, and based on circumstance, I figured this was the best way to do this. You may have heard a few weeks ago I mentioned this on a normal episode of Contest of Challengers, which this counts as a normal episode. I don't know why I said normal. But I had done a Skype recording with Aubrey Sitterson and Chris Moreno about their new 10-speed press graphic novel, The Comic Book Story of Professional Wrestling. And these guys took time out of their day to talk to me for a while. And for whatever reason, the recording of this came out so weirdly jumbled as if it were two separate layers. The bottom layer, which was quiet, was the regular conversation the three of us had in a linear fashion. The top layer, which was much louder, was that same conversation 30 seconds later, but without me. So just Aubrey and Chris's voices much louder in the forefront. And because of the way this was recorded as one track, I couldn't separate it, and I didn't know what to do, and I thought about just putting it up as a jumbled mess, but it was terrible. There was no real way to separate what was going on. I listened to it a bunch of different ways to see if I could at least justify putting it out, and I couldn't. So what I do is I listen to the entire thing in headphones, and then I'm verbally dictating it to you as it's happening, but I'm only using, for the most part, the louder forefront track, well, it's all one track, but the louder forefront portion of Aubrey and Chris talking. I'm not repeating what I say because that's too quiet in the background and I couldn't hear a lot of it. So what I tried to do was put this together via context where you can understand what they're talking about, and once or twice I actually do say the things that I was saying when there's a long gap and you can hear me, that I can hear me talking. But also, I don't do voices for this. I don't want to do them a disservice of trying to imitate their voices. So it's just my voice talking like me the whole way through, and I don't specifically say who is Aubrey and who is Chris when they're talking, because I think it's fairly obvious, or it may not necessarily take away from the content of the information being imparted if you don't know who's saying it. I don't think that is much of a factor. So this is not ideal, and this is not how I wanted this episode to go, but also this weekend Dal is at TFCon for 3 days, so he is not around, and I thought, what better way to try to make a go of this episode. So it's a few weeks later than I wanted it to be, and it doesn't have their voices. You know what? I'm going to edit. I'm going to throw in some bits and pieces just so they're on here, so it's not, you can at least get a feel for what I'm talking about. But anyway, thank you for bearing with me here on this episode of Contest of Challengers, normally a comics industry business podcast on the Yuck Channel Podcast Network here in Chicago. This is an interview episode, and it was supposed to be Aubrey Sitterson and Chris Moreno.
Hey boys, sorry to keep you waiting.
Now you're locked in, and no one can disturb you, and this is it, man.
You were correct, but yeah.
It's in the sanctum.
That's right.
Just trying to live long enough to watch everything go to shit, man. That's the goal.
After 60, I don't think you really enjoy too much anyway, so it's fine. Yeah, you don't have to worry too much anymore, man. None of this is going to affect you. You're fine. You had your run. This is taking a grim turn already, Patrick. This is your podcast, all the grimmest shit. I just worked out. I got the endorphins going. I'm drinking water. I'm well hydrated right now. Everything's groovy. This is content. Let's not waste it. It's always easier to talk about what you don't like about a thing. I think this is not just about comics or wrestling. It's a life culture thing. As a result of everybody having a platform, which is great, And I love the way that knowledge and expertise and access are democratized. We've lowered these barriers and got rid of the gatekeepers. But what that means is everybody's a critic and everybody has a voice and wants to express their feelings about things, like the art and media and whatever they're consuming, whatever media or genre it is. But you're right, it's easier to criticize. It's easier to nitpick and point out the things you don't like about a thing. But I think that is not really criticism. If you talk to actual critics, people who make their living studying stuff, people that have done this for years, no matter what the genre, their job is about much more than pointing out things they don't like. That is a pretty shallow, uninteresting, uninformative exercise. Criticism is more than just critiquing. The harder, more difficult thing, but also the more enlightening and worthwhile thing to do, is to look at something and say, what's good about this? What about this works? And that becomes more important when you don't even like a thing. Me and Chris do this. We have this conversation a lot. One time I did it to him. I still, to this day, don't really understand Bruce Springsteen. Like, I don't get it. I don't like it. I like 10th Avenue Freeze Out. I actually thought it was 10th Avenue Freestyle. I didn't even know the name of the song for so long, for years. Yeah, you're trying to debate people on Bruce Springsteen. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? I don't like Bruce Springsteen, but I know so many people do, and people I respect, and I like their taste. I think they're smart folks. And so I spent a lot of time listening to it, even though I didn't like it, and now I kind of get it. I understand it. I think that is much more educational, a much more worthwhile thing to do for people to do as a consumer of art, like somebody who appreciates created things. That's a much more worthwhile thing to do than to talk about how much I don't like these goofy, jangly horns or stupid hoarse voice, or how it's basically the Dave Matthews Band for people from New Jersey. Even though I think all that, that's not critically interesting in the way that it is to listen to it and say, oh no, it is a throwback act, and he's informed by kind of like folk acts and electric Bob Dylan, and it's also kind of garage rocky, and it's from this very specific scene in Jersey Shore, like Blue Eyed Soul and bar bands, stuff like that. So that's a much more interesting thing to take away from Bruce Springsteen than focusing on the things that I don't like. And by the way, what's amazing about Aubrey talking to me about Bruce Springsteen is that at no point did I ever tell him I'm a fan of Bruce Springsteen. He just unprompted asked me and said, hey, what do people like about Bruce Springsteen? And I'm like, I don't know. I grew up in New Jersey, so Bruce Springsteen and Bon Jovi were sort of like issued to you in school when you came in. But it was completely unprompted. It was almost like he looked me up and down and said, this guy looks like a Springsteen fan. I just thought you'd know. I think another good guiding rule is don't yuck somebody's yum. If somebody digs something and you don't, what is the percentage? Let's examine the reasons of you telling them that you don't like it or why it's bad. One is just to make them feel bad. One is just fully mean and hateful. Another is to perform expertise, which is just so gross. Like what? So you don't like something, so that makes you smarter or a better consumer of products? Everything about that is stupid. And I don't know, what else is there even, what are the reasons there to tell someone that something they like isn't good? I tried really hard, and I'm not perfect about it. Especially, like, again, get 2 beers in me, this whole thing changes. Yeah, after what you just said about Bruce Springsteen, I try and say, it's a thing I made a conscious effort of. Instead of saying, that sucks, or that's bad, or that's awful, I say, that's not for me. It's just not for me. And that's fine. Doctor Who is not for me. Doctor Who is decidedly not for me, and that's fine. I don't care. Like, I get a little tired of the drama every time a new one of these things is announced. Like, everybody is, on every side is, I don't know, upset about it. But that's just me, I guess. I don't know. It's a double-edged sword, right? Like, it's made it a lot easier to find your tribe, but it's made everything a little more tribal. There are sides to everything. In the old days, you only had 2 or 3 kids in your high school who liked comics at all. If they were more of a Marvel fan, you were more of a DC fan, I mean, you just dealt with it because there's like three of you. The democratization of content and lowering of barriers and gatekeepers, it's all double-edged swords. There's a lot of good, but there's a lot of bad that comes with it. It's changed. It's something different. We did a book. Yeah, you heard of it? Yeah, you did. So we're here to talk about your book, Worth, from Arcana Studios back in 2014. I'm having a real hard time stocking it lately. It seems like Diamond doesn't keep in stock anymore. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That was 4 years ago. We're actually together to talk about... We're not here. You guys are completely across the country from where I am. You're both in Los Angeles, to my being in Chicago. But that just shows you that wrestling brings everyone together from every geographical background. And we're doing this because you have a wonderful new book out. The comic book story of professional wrestling. Written by Aubrey Sitterson and drawn by Chris Moreno. But I feel like just saying writing and drawing is not enough for how much work you both had to put into this. You're both the creators of this. And while you may not have created professional wrestling, you've certainly distilled it in a way that makes it a lot easier for people who've never seen wrestling understand it, but also for people only like certain parts of it and can realize the depths to which it comes from. And I'm going on way too long about it. It's been about 2 years since our editor, Patrick Barb, first reached out to me. Maybe Chris feels differently, but ask us whatever you think your audience wants to hear. I've been doing wrestling and leftist comedy podcasts and stuff like that, which is a very different audience than what you have. So yeah, let's cover whatever you think they want to hear. Let's be good gladiators and give people what they want. So we're going to have to murder each other, right? I think 2 projects is enough before Aubrey and I engage in Bloodsport. We had a good run, buddy. Prepare to die. It seems like only yesterday I got contacted by Roddenberry Entertainment. It's all mutual friendships, I think. Paul Morrissey was an editor over at Arcana, and he recommended me for the book Worth, and Paul was my editor at Boom on Toy Story. And I was familiar enough with Roddenberry Entertainment because I'd done that Days Missing book, and that was good. That was Phil Hesser stuff, right? Yeah. But basically, they approached me and Aubrey separately. They approached me about doing the art, and they approached Aubrey about doing the story. I had read an initial treatment that Aubrey had done, and I thought it was the coolest idea for a book. The high concept pitch is Gran Torino meets The Incredibles. It's this formerly badass superhero from Detroit who's fallen on hard times and gotten old. His powers don't work right anymore, and he's just sort of getting his groove back. But Aubrey's take had really great character moments and a lot of sensitivity to the characters, and it got me really excited to work with him. And it was also cool to work on a graphic novel project, something that wasn't necessarily going to be released in individual issues. You know, you actually get to tell a beginning and to end story. It really appealed to me, and we were off to the races, and we had a great time working together. We had a really great time, and Aubrey, how long were you in LA? I moved out in 2012, and the book came out in 2014. Had you just moved to LA? I had just moved to LA when I started writing the script for it. I'd done outlines and pitches and stuff, but once I got to the story, I was out here. It was kind of cool. We eventually got to hang out. We met up a couple times and talked about the book. And we did some signings after. Yeah, and you came to see wrestling with me. Yeah, that's right. Aubrey invited me out to a Lucha Underground taping, which was super, super fun, which was long before any of this book happened. It was like season 1, episode 22 or something like that. You could see our goofy asses in the front row. My podcast is called Straight Shoot. It started off as the Raw After Show, and it slowly morphed into other stuff. Started covering other promotions, doing retro stuff, always with different guests. Always tried to get a lot of wrestlers on, a lot of NXT people now, like Roderick Strong, Tommaso Ciampa, Shayna Baszler, Adam Cole, Chris Hero. These were all guests who were on the show regularly. And Shayna, before she even started professional wrestling, when she was training as a catch wrestler, and I would have on wrestlers and comedians and actors and musicians and writers. Generally anybody who I thought would be interesting to listen to. Anyone who wanted to talk about wrestling. And we deep dive, and it was the approach we talked about earlier. There were so many wrestling podcasts, and even more now, and there were a ton back then, and most of them, what we were talking about earlier, criticism. Not actual criticism, complaints. List of things people don't like, and reasons why something sucks. And I found that misery. I found it exhausting. It's not what I wanted to do. That just wasn't a podcast that I want to listen to. It would have exhausted me to try and do it myself. The goal with Straight Shoot was always to find stuff we liked and talk about why it's good, and analyze why it works and what about it makes it so good. And being able to do that with professional wrestlers who I really respect and who are smart and who are generous with their time and their knowledge enough to talk about it with me was super educational. I thought I really understood wrestling when I started the podcast, but like six or 8 months in, I realized I didn't really get it. I did, Now I do. People that do this for a living explaining to me and really get into the weeds of why stuff works and why it doesn't work, that's what did it for me. It was talking about why things worked, not talking about why things sucked. It's a testament to that approach. Was Chris ever a guest on that? No, never. It didn't occur to either of us. I didn't really feel a burning need to be part of the show. I mean, I'm a fan of wrestling, but I'm not as hardcore as Aubrey is. By the time we started working in this, it became primarily a New Japan show, and now New Japan stuff is... The website is translated, and most of the shows have English commentary. Even like a year ago, New Japan was a lot harder to watch for American audiences. Also, Chris is really busy with this graphic novel. Chris has a lot on his plate once he started working on this, right? Oh, yeah. I'll leave it at that. Yeah. It never really made sense to me to say, hey, Chris, first, hey, why don't you watch this 4-hour Japanese wrestling show that you don't know anybody in, then put your thoughts on it, and then come ready to do a deep dive, critical engagement with this material for an hour and a half next week. It didn't seem like a good use of his time. I mean, I would have done it, but it would have been to the detriment of our book. It's 170 pages of art, plus index and stuff like that. Chris didn't get started until July of last year. Really, it was Aubrey and I were talking about the book and about what it was like to work on the book, but we were also joined by a lot of people on the art team. Between our colorists, Len O'Grady, who I worked with on Sidekick, Alan Pasalacqua, Brad Simpson, my brother Jay Moreno, he colored a few pages. We had Russ Wooten on letters. Also, I was able to rely pretty heavily on my studio, Garage Art Studio guys, like Dennis Culver, people like that to help me out as we were going along. But it was pretty much just me every day, as soon as I got out of work, going to the studio and cranking for another 8 hours. I was basically working 16-hour days just to get it all squared away. But it's also one of those things where it wasn't wasted time. Every minute was spent working on the book and getting to watch 4 hours of Ric Flair promos to get all the reference I needed. It wasn't drudgery. But I could keep the promos going in the background stuff. It does sound like a lot of work, but the big takeaway is that this was a blast to work on. And I talked about it with Aubrey a lot. I don't think there's any other project I would have felt like putting this much time into. I'd taken a break from comics for a little while, just because I was busy doing the day job. So when he came to me about the book, it was one of those things where he wasn't really twisting my arm to get me to work on it. Chris put an obscene amount of work on it, and even now I feel like he's underselling how much work he put into this thing. It was obscene. And I, hour-wise, what I counted, can't even hold a candle to what Chris did. I think both of us felt like, coming in for me, I came in really arrogant. I'd never written nonfiction before, but I was in the middle of my G.I. Joe run, and I was like, I can write G.I. Joe pretty fast. I just think about how long it takes me to write an issue, so I had it worked out in my head how long it would take me to write this. And I got 4 pages in and said, oh no, this is so much more difficult. But we talked about it a lot throughout. This thing is meant to be an evergreen. This is not disposable entertainment, and I don't mean that disparagingly, because if you're a wrestling fan, you know all about this. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with serialized storytelling where you enjoy the moment and go on to the next one. That's what comics are, and I love that, but that's not what this is. This is something that was meant to stay on the shelves, to have a long tail, we wrote and drew and created and worked with all the collaborators in such a way that this thing hopefully will stand the test of time, and it'll be a reference point for people for years to come. So even while I was in the middle, I had 3.5 months to write this, and it was brutal. For 170 pages, that's not bad. I could do this standing on my head. But then I realized, even though I read all these books and have a shelf full of reference, stuff like that, I ended up having to go find a whole lot more specific dates and who they were facing and what they were wearing and chronologies and stuff like that. And it was all consuming. It, like Chris said, it wasn't drudgery. It felt worth it. Even then, nothing like this exists in any medium. Not just in comics. There's no documentary that covers all of wrestling history. There's not even a book that covers all of it. There's no overview. So this was the first one. And I wanted it to be the best one. I didn't want it to come out and have people go, oh, I guess we have room to do a better version of this. People be like, we never need to write about wrestling ever again. It's done. Aubrey and Chris did it. I just got finished telling you what a nightmare it was to write this thing, with all the research and everything. But man, I would love to do more. I would love to do... There are a lot of things that got left on the cutting room floor, developments that have happened since we finished writing it, that at the time I didn't really have the historical perspective to talk about. Now I would a little bit. Maybe one day there'll be a sequel or an update. I think there is a big overlap with wrestling and comic fans. I think the similarities between wrestling and comics are pretty shallow and surface level and maybe a little bit overblown. I think fundamentally they're really different mediums. And wrestling is its own medium. It is not a genre of TV or entertainment. It's its own thing. And I don't think it's theater. A lot of books say, oh, it's live action theater they put on TV. No, it operates by different rules. It has different metrics for success. I think that they're all of the things people talk about. Wrestling is live action superheroes and morality plays and serial life storytelling and soap operas, and that does have a lot in common with superhero books, but the metrics for success are totally different. This is the thing we go into detail. One of the big theses of the book is that wrestling is a con. Wrestling at its core is a trick. It's a shell game. It's a magic trick. It's a confidence game. It has its origins in carnivals, carnival games, and bookies. Unscrupulous bookies in on it with the promoter and the wrestler. That's the origin of wrestling. While comics and television and novels and movies are written and created with a goal of character arcs and development and story and exploring themes and metaphors and all this high-minded college boy stuff, which I love, wrestling doesn't care. Wrestling only sees that stuff as a means to an end, which on one level is getting to the fight and giving you an exciting fight, but the real goal is getting you to pay money to come back next week. And I think that is a core difference. There is a lot of overlap with fans. That's one of the goals for the book, honestly, is to really explore why wrestling is different and what makes it unique from everything else, except for maybe 3-card Monte or carnival games and magic tricks. Those are what I think are most similar to wrestling. I think that's really at the heart of modern wrestling family. I think that's really at the heart of modern wrestling fandom is that the old con man saying, you can't con an honest John. What that means is if you're going to con somebody, if you're going to trick somebody and get their money from them, if you're going to defraud another human being, they have to think that they're the one doing the defrauding. Like, if you look at classic confidence games, it's all about making the person you're conning think that they're getting one over on you and that they're the one getting the big deal. They have to be complicit in this con. And wrestling is the same way. At a certain level, you have to be willing to go along with it. At one level, there's the kid who believes it's real and just loses their mind as soon as the pyro starts going off and the wrestlers come out and they start hitting each other. But the other far end of the extreme is the person on message boards and Reddit and reading dirt sheets and opining on Twitter, thinking that they know the backstage stuff and who the promoters like, who they hate, where people are going to go, and what the storylines are, and they think they're in on it, but they're really not. It's the same thing. They think they know, but they don't, and wrestling uses that at every level. It's beautiful. So this is the point that I asked them if they remembered when wrestling stopped being real to them and the realization of the scripted elements came to the forefront. Chris, it's a weird, interesting question for me because I don't remember there being a time where that illusion was shattered for me. I feel like for me it was just sort of transition into somewhat of a deeper understanding about it. Here's the thing. For a lot of time that question gets asked, I think that the idea is it's like learning Santa Claus isn't real, that like somehow that was the end of my innocence. But I feel like with all the other things, like with all the other things I like, that wasn't the thing that got me into it. Chris, what was the end of your innocence? From a wrestling standpoint? No, just in life. Oh, I don't know, man. It's hard to say. I feel like that's for another podcast. For wrestling, the movie Ready to Rumble was probably the end of my innocence. That's the thing. It's that Apple Jacks commercial. They don't taste like apples. Who cares, Dad? Go back to mowing the lawn.
He's got the jacks.
I thought you boys were going to work on the garage.
Dad, we're resting. Yeah.
And eating those apple jacks, I see.
Hey, what's wrong with you kids? They don't taste like apples. That isn't why we like them. Then why?
I know. You just do.
That's not the draw. For me, I don't remember a time where it's like, oh, this is fake. I fell out of wrestling more when I just didn't... There wasn't a lot there that was grabbing me. If we're talking just strictly WWE stuff, my favorite wrestlers weren't necessarily the big Triple H type dudes. I liked the fast talkers. I liked the motor mouths. At a time when The Rock was leaving to go do movies and things like that, a lot of my interest was starting to wane because the characters that I liked to see, I wasn't seeing a lot of. But then I started getting bigger into Lucha Libre. It was sort of like I just moved around to the things that I got into. When I was a kid, I remember really vividly being at my cousin's house and wrestling was on, and I was like, oh, wrestling. And they're like, oh, you know it's fake, right? And I'm like, what do you mean? And they said, like, watch him throw the punch. And they were still doing the old, I call it the Memphis punch. It's what Jerry Lawler does. And Jeff Jarrett does it too. The wind-up stomping punch. And I love it now. It's one of my favorite things. But at the time, I was like, oh, man, they are stomping the mat to make that noise. That isn't the noise of a man being punched in the head. And that floored me. I was probably like 7. I don't know. I was young. And they said that. And they said, yeah, and when there's blood, it's because they have vials of chicken blood that they smash them on each other, which is not true. It's a perfect example of what we were just talking about. Even in thinking you know what's really going on, you don't. You have no idea. That used to be, with the internet, it's thankfully gone away as a myth of wrestling. No one in the history of wrestling has ever kept a vial of chicken blood concealed on them and used it during a match. It's so much easier just to use a razor and slice your head open. That's so much simpler than carrying around a vial of chicken blood. But I believed that for years. Chicken blood. I think the line is fixed, not fake. It's fixed like boxing or MMA. In the build-up to this book being released, Aubrey had called hundreds of comic stores and introduced himself and talked about the book to try to get people aware of it and try to get stores to order it. So I had asked him about that. I asked my social media friends and followers, people I knew all over the country and stuff, for suggestions of stores that they dig and liked and would like to see the book at, because that's a good in. I talked to your normal pull list customers, and they said you should carry this book. I also just called stores that I knew had a big presence in their city or had a big online presence. I just made a huge list and started calling. The reactions kind of ran the gamut. Most people were pretty excited because even if the person, like the store owner, wasn't a huge wrestling fan, but their employees were and their customers were. There's people coming in with wrestling t-shirts. You hear people talking about the wrestling events that week, like when they're buying their books. So they know there is this, like the smart ones knew that there are a ton of wrestling fans, an enormous amount of wrestling fans. Wrestling is tremendously popular, especially right now. And I think most of the retailers were super into it because they said, oh, that's something I can sell. I know right off the bat 2 or 3 people who will buy this thing. And then I kind of just tried to impart to people that the book is designed to stoke the nostalgia of hardcore fans and Labs fans and to fill in the blanks in people's knowledge base. Because wrestling is like comics. People drop out for 2-3 years, they come back, they drop out again. It's not uncommon. And everybody's got gaps in their knowledge. So it's designed to fill in those gaps, but it's also designed to work as a primer. And what I told people is I guaranteed that everybody buying Hip Hop Family Tree are not diehard hip hop fans. This book is the same way. It's for people who like learning about a distinctly American form of pop culture entertainment. It's Americana. It really is. That's one of the things that Cody Rhodes had said on the back of the book. One of the last great forms of Americana. I think that's true. And I think there's a lot of interest in wrestling as this unique art form, especially as it's gaining popularity. And my hope, and I've heard this from a few people, like Howard Chaykin, hates wrestling, hates it. Robert Kirkman has a quote on the back, these guys hate wrestling, but they really dug the book. They liked the book. It allowed them to understand what it is that people love about wrestling. And then I referenced Dungeons & Dragons and how it's got a resurgence, and there's so many celebrities, actors, wrestlers who are into it, and how there's a lot more public groups, and how that's a thing where it may not be for me, but I understand people love it, and it just has a huge following right now. It's a very substantial book. It looks good wrapped. It makes a great Christmas present. I think it's a big book for Christmas. Did you see the spot gloss on the cover? Yeah. That's one of my favorite things, when people take pictures and post it, and the light or the flash reflects off of the spot varnish on the cover. It does it. It does it for me. What it specifically does for me is a topic for a different podcast. We won't go into that now. It's only $18. What a great deal. People should go out and buy one right now. The on sale date was October 3rd, because comic book stores get things on Wednesdays, but bookstores get things on Tuesdays. And it's supposed to be October 2nd and October 3rd. It's supposed to be out last week from when this was recorded. It would take a more learned man than me to fully understand Diamond's shipping dates, but it got bumped, and it's out now. Here's what I like about that. We're living that long tail, Daddy. We got another week of promotion, and to be able to talk about this thing, and even with my 250 retailer calls, people didn't order up this thing. As of yesterday, the date wasn't it was back ordered at Diamond, and there are more copies coming, but also at this point, they have announced a second printing of it. If I was Diamond, I'd order a bazillion. Mr. Diamond, I believe that's his name, the owner of Diamond, if you're listening, or Mrs. Diamond, I forget. If you're listening, you should be ordering more. And then he talks about how it's not sold out and it's not unavailable, but it is going to a second printing now. Some retailers set up direct accounts with the publisher. 10-Speed Press is part of Penguin Random House, so it's not some penny ante fly-by-night publishing operation, right? They're a big deal, so people can get it direct from them. And Diamond should be getting more. I can't imagine they would want to leave all of this filthy lucre on the table. And then Chris and I talk about how he has been to Challengers before, around like 2008, 2009 for the Windy City Comic Con, which I believe the 10th anniversary of the very first one was yesterday or today, as of this recording. I know it's weird. I'm breaking the veil. I'm talking as Patrick in the middle of this whole podcast where you only hear my voice. But I believe where Chris had signed, because it was so long ago, was in the doorway. That is the doorway to get to Sidekicks. And I think his contribution may have been lost. So he's got to come back and draw on the wall again. I imagine David Hasselhoff playing while you bust down the wall. That was Aubrey. Then I mentioned how many wrestlers are on a page. Like some pages could have up to 100 characters on it because they cover a lot of ground in a short period of time. And Chris says there's like 8 wrestlers to a panel sometimes. It's jam-packed. Not just that, we got weird cameos and threw in some Easter eggs from wrestling lore. I don't think all the Easter eggs have been found yet, actually. Just today we saw a couple people spot some things and mention them online, but there's a lot in there. You can find Chris Moreno at Chris Moreno 121 on Twitter, Chris Moreno _121 on Instagram. I thought I picked a number that was far enough down the line, but apparently there was another on Instagram. And you can find me on Facebook, The Art of Chris Moreno. I'm usually on all of those places. That's ChrisMoreno. And I'm Aubrey Sitterson on everything. AbreySitterson. AubreySitterson.com. Links to all my social media there. You can see my other books, upcoming shows and appearances. If you happen to see me, tell me at a show, mention that you've heard me on this very podcast. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. It's all Aubrey Sitterson, except Facebook, where I shut down my author page and switched it to my personal page. My author page uses Aubrey Sitterson, so my personal is Charles Aubrey Sitterson. I have a very fancy boy name. I'm very proud of it. Just search for Aubrey Sitterson. There's not a lot of us. And then they just signed at Collector's Paradise in California with the fallen angel, Christopher Daniels, a longtime supporter of Challengers. I asked how that went. Oh, it was excellent. It was really good. We sold an upsettingly large amount of these things. We sold a lot of them. Even Ed, the store owner, was startled by how many of these things that we actually sold ahead of time, because he was selling signed ones on the website after the fact, and then from people to walk-ins. But he had, the week of the signing, he had to order more because of how many pre-orders he had. It went great. It was awesome having Christopher Daniels there. First of all, that guy rules, and he's a really nice guy. He gets it. But also because people at that signing and people who ordered books through Ed up to that point got a head start on something that I think is going to be one of the coolest things about this book. There's so many wrestlers in this thing, and Chris drew so many awesome, amazing wrestlers doing awesome, amazing stuff. I'm excited for wrestlers starting to autograph their actual appearances in the book. And Christopher Daniels signed his appearances for everybody there and for all the pre-orders we got in. So those folks get a little head start surprise and they're flipping through, and they'll find a Christopher Daniels signature next to his first appearance. And there it is. What a weird experience to listen to all this jumbling at the exact same time in earphones and try to translate to you in a linear fashion to try to make it make sense. Once again, a huge gratitude to Aubrey and Chris for taking time out of their busy days and schedules and promotions of this book to talk to me about it, and huge apologies to them for the horrible way in which it wound up being recorded, and then for me having to do it this way and doing a poor job of conveying their tone and inflection as this was being dictated. But hopefully it gave you enough of an idea of what this book is about. I'm a big fan of it, and in the weeks that it's been out, it's on the front table. I pitch it to people. We stocked up through our secondary distributor, so we do have it, even though it'll be some time before there's a second print, I think, available. Challengers does have a bunch of copies available now, and I will be promoting it to everybody at least through Christmas as it comes out. So sorry for the very absurd weirdness of this podcast, but thanks for listening, and keep reading comics, and or also watching pro wrestling.
This has been Contest of Challengers. Thanks for listening. Keep reading comics. Challengers is located at 1845 Northwestern Avenue in the Bucktown neighborhood of Chicago. 773-278-0155. Keep up to date with new releases and events at challengerscomics.com. Like Challengers Comics on Facebook, follow @Challengers on Twitter, and help fund this podcast at patreon.com/challengers.
Are we?
And
is
maybe
this
you're right, Aubrey.
content
Maybe
right now,
it
man?
is the
This is
catharsis of it.
Let's not waste it.
I
It's
don't
like,
know.
are you recording?
I saved that.
Good. I don't want any of this content to get lost.
I got I just worked out. I got the endorphins. I could walk.
You're doing the Mark
I
Maron
right
thing.
now.
I know, man. I listen to podcasts.
But I mean, don't you find that talking about wrestling is the same way? Like it's
That's a fun
easier to
surprise
say
for
what
me
you
later.
don't like
Man,
than what
I
you
think
do.
that, I think
Sure.
you're right. It's always easier to talk about what you don't like
recording
about a
everything,
thing.
so I'll
But I think that this
I mean,
is not just in comics, not just in wrestling. This is a culture-wide
I'll
thing.
edit it so it's a little bit more seamless.
You
It
know,
won't
as
be
a
more
result
of
of everybody having a platform,
also
which is great. And you know,
Yeah.
I love
Also,
the way that
I don't know if I'm
knowledge
gonna leave in
and
all the crap that
expertise
Chris and I were
and
talking about before you
access
got
has
on,
been
but I'll
democratized.
think about
We've
it.
lowered these barriers and got rid of gatekeepers. But what that means is that everybody's a critic and everybody has a voice and wants to express their feelings about things. And like the art and media that they're consuming, whatever genre or whatever medium or genre it is. But you're right. It's easier to criticize. It's easier just to nitpick and like point out the things that you don't like about a thing. But I think that that is not really criticism. You know, like if you talk to actual critics, right, like people who've made their living and like studied this stuff and you know, done this for years, you know, no matter what the genre, their job is about much more than just pointing at things that they don't like, because ultimately that's a pretty shallow, uninteresting, uninformative exercise.
Easier to nitpick and like point out the things
It's not criticism. Yeah, like criticism is about more than just critiquing. And I think that, you know, the harder, the more difficult thing, but also the more enlightening and the more worthwhile thing to do is to look at something and say, okay, what's good about this? Why does this work? And that becomes more important when you don't even like a thing, man. One of the me and Chris do this, have done this kind of a lot. I remember one time I did it to him because I still to this day don't really understand Bruce Springsteen. Like I don't get it. Like I don't like it. It just I like 10th Avenue Freeze Out, and I thought it was 10th Avenue Freestyle. I didn't even know the name. I didn't even know the name of the song for like years. And I was
you're trying to debate people on Bruce Springsteen, and they're like, "What the hell are you talking about?"
The Bruce Springsteen song I like is 10th Avenue Freestyle. People are like, "Oh, it's not even a song. You just made that up." But no, like I don't like Bruce Springsteen, but like I know so many people do, and a lot of people I respect and I like their tastes, and I think they're smart folks. And so like I spend a lot of time listening to it, even though I didn't like it, and now I kind of get it. Like I understand it, but I think that's a much more educational thing and a worthwhile thing for me to do as a consumer of art, right? Or as an aesthete, you know, like somebody who appreciates the beauty in created things. Like that's a much more worthwhile thing to do than to like sit around and talk about how I don't like all this goofy jangly horns or stupid hoarse voice or the fact that it's basically just like Dave Matthews Band for people from New Jersey, right? Like that's not even though I think all that stuff, like that's not critically interesting, right? In the way that it is to listen to that stuff and be like, oh well, no, it's a throwback act, and he's informed by kind of like folk acts and like, you know, like electric Bob Dylan, but it's also kind of garage rocky, and it's from this very specific scene in like, you know, Jersey Shore, like Blue Eyed Soul and like rock, like bar bands and stuff like that. Like that's a much more interesting thing to take away from Bruce Springsteen than just focusing on the things I hate about it.
By the way, what's amazing about Aubrey talking to me about Bruce Springsteen is at no point did I ever hint to him that I'm a fan of Bruce Springsteen. He just like unprompted just asked me like, hey, so what do people like about Bruce Springsteen? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I grew up in New Jersey, so Bruce Springsteen and Bon Jovi were sort of like, they were like issued to you in school, like when you came in, they'd give you like, you know, but yeah, that was completely unprompted. It's almost like he looked me up and down and said, this guy looks like a Springsteen fan.
You're a smart guy. I just thought you know. I thought you didn't know.
Hey, so what do people like about Bruce Springsteen?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I grew up in New Jersey, so Bruce Springsteen and Bon Jovi were sort of like, they were like issued to you in school. Like,
yeah, I think that's a distinction,
like,
man.
You know, but yeah, that was completely unprompted. It's almost like he looked me up and down and said, this guy looks like a Springsteen fan.
Well, this is the point. This is the point of the conversation that I say that I'm also a Jersey boy and was born and raised in New Jersey. So I completely understand. But what I like what you were saying, Aubrey, is that you weren't saying it's bad. You're saying you don't like it. And I want to jump back and say when you first described a few minutes ago, when you first described the way that the internet has given people voices was one of the best phrases, democratizing it, I think is what you said. And one of the things that I specifically try to do, and while I did say that we do kind of get dark if we need to, but I don't start that way, and I don't immediately criticize something. I would rather talk about something I like.
I think another like good,
but if somebody asks
like
me, hey,
guiding
what do you think
rule
of this
is
thing,
don't yuck somebody's yum.
Then I'll go into it.
Right.
But I don't
if somebody
like the idea
if somebody digs something
like,
and you don't,
say,
well, like
Dr.
what is the
Who
percentage? And like let's examine the reasons for you telling them that you don't like it or like why it's bad. One is just to make them feel bad, right? One is just fully mean-spirited and hateful.
Well, I didn't like that.
Another is to
there's
perform.
No value in that. You're not helping anybody by doing that.
It has its places. places. It has its places. But like the other one is to perform expertise, which is just so gross, man. Like what? Like so you don't like something so that makes you smarter or like a better consumer of products? Like everything about that's fucking stupid. And I don't know. Like, what else is there even? Like, what else? What other reason for it is there to just tell somebody like something they like isn't good? For the I try really hard to, and I'm not perfect about it. Especially again, get 2 beers in me, and this whole thing changes.
I was gonna say after what you just said about Bruce Springsteen, it's like
I said the good stuff too. I said the good stuff too. But I try and say it's like a thing I've made like a conscious effort of. Instead of saying that sucks or it's bad or that's awful, I say that's not for me. It's just not for me, and that's fine. Doctor Who's not for me. Doctor Who is decidedly not for me, and that's fine. I don't care. Like I get a little tired of the drama every fucking time a new one of these things is announced. Like everybody's on every side is, I don't know, upset about it. But that's just the internet, I guess. I don't know. It's like a thing I make like a conscious effort of. Instead of saying that sucks or it's bad or that's awful, I say that's not for me.
Yeah, perfect.
It's just not
perfect.
For me. And that's fine. Doctor Who's not for me. Doctor Who is decidedly not for me, and that's fine. I don't care. Like I get a little tired of the drama every fucking time a new one of these things is announced. Right. Like everybody's on every side is, I don't know, upset about it.
Yeah.
But that's just the internet, I guess. I don't know.
That is just the internet, and that's the whole point. Like these people would not. Let me step back for a second and say that one of the reasons that we are called Challengers Comics and Conversation is because growing up, I noticed a lot of the people that I knew who read comics were all segregated and didn't necessarily have other people that they knew that read comics. Like I had only like maybe 2 people I knew in my school who read comics as well. So obviously we kind of gravitated toward each other because of the shared commonality and the love of the medium and stuff. But we want to let people know that, hey, if you are a comic fan and you like comics, you can be safe to talk about the things you like here. And it was just a way to let people know that this is, even though it's may not have an outlet elsewhere,
sword, right?
You'll
like
have
it's made a lot
here,
easier to find your tribe.
That was,
but it's also made things much more tribal, I guess, right? There's sides to everything. When in the old days, if you only had 2 or 3 kids in your high school who liked comics at all, if they were more of a Marvel fan, you were more of a DC fan. Well, I don't know, you just dealt with it
just shout into the because of social media and have it there.
Yeah, there's only 3 of you, right?
You can't find
this community is growing. Yeah, and it is a I don't know, all of the democratization of content and the lowering of barriers and the getting rid of gatekeepers. It's all like double-edged swords. Like there's a lot of good, there's a lot of bad that comes with it. It's just it's a change, something different. If they were more of a Marvel fan, you were more of a DC fan. Well, I don't know, you just dealt with it.
Because you're still a comic fan.
You heard of it?
Yeah.
You can't find this this community. It is a
Roddenberry Entertainment, Arcana.
The democratization of content and the lowering of barriers and the getting rid of gatekeepers. It's all like double-edged swords. Like there's a lot of good, there's a lot of bad that comes with it. It's just it's a change, something different.
I mean, you guys especially right now. I guess I should probably try to direct this a little bit more toward what we're doing, what we're here for. Yeah, you did. So we're here to talk about your book Worth from Arcana Studios back in 2014, and I'm having a real hard time stocking it lately. It doesn't Diamond doesn't seem to keep it in stock anymore. But anyway, wait, no, I'm sorry, that was 4 years ago. We are here to talk about here. I say here. We're not here. You guys are completely across the country from where I am. You guys are both in Los Angeles, to my being in Chicago. But that just shows you that wrestling brings everybody together, because we're basically doing this because you have a wonderful new book out, The Comic Book Story of Professional Wrestling, written by you, Aubrey Sitterson, and drawn by you, Chris Moreno. But I feel like just saying writing and drawing is not nearly enough for how much work you both had to put into this.
Keep doing it, man. Keep talking about
the
this.
You're
I like
both,
what I'm hearing.
The creators of this. And while you may not have created professional wrestling, you've certainly distilled it in a way that makes it a lot easier for people who've never seen wrestling to understand, but also for people who
our editor Patrick Barb first reached out to
the
me.
Depth to which it comes from, and I'm going on way too long about it, but
different Patrick.
I like what I'm hearing.
I think it's
Well, I mean,
it's a different job.
This
I think
is
there
a
are different
book that,
expectations for the two of you.
You've been working on for 2 full years, right? Like 2 years from the time that it was announced.
It's been about 2 years since our editor Patrick Barb first reached out to me.
And I got to tell you, every time I hear you say that name, I think you're saying my name, and I'm like, what did I do? What? Oh,
Different.
yeah, right. No, that guy seems way more on the ball than I am, and a really great guy.
It's a different job.
Sure.
Expectations.
Dude, totally.
My point is,
I don't know.
in
Maybe Chris feels
knowing that I
different,
was
but I
gonna
feel
be
like
talking to the two of you
ask
today,
us just whatever you think your
I
audience
don't
wants
want
to hear,
this
because
to
I've been
be the
doing
kind of
I've been
situation
doing
where it's
wrestling
like,
and like leftist
Hollywood actors sitting
like
in a room
comedy
where you talk
podcasts
for 2 minutes
and stuff
to
like that, which I think is a very
50
different
people
audience
in
than,
this
than who
span
you've
of a
got
day. So
listening in. So
I've been
yeah,
reading and
let's
listening
cover
to
whatever
different interviews
you think
with
they
both
want
of
to
you,
hear. Let's
'cause I don't
let's be
wanna
good
ask the
gladiators
same
and give the people what they
questions, but at
want.
the same time, we're
So
most
we're gonna have
likely
to murder
reaching
each
an
other,
audience
right?
that has
Murder
never
each
heard any of
other.
that
Yeah.
stuff. So
Totally. I
Yeah.
don't know. Maybe Chris feels different, but I feel like ask us. Just
I
whatever
think
you
2
think
projects
your
together
audience
is
hears.
enough
I've been
before
doing-
Aubrey and
I've
I
been doing
engage in
wrestling
blood sport.
and leftist.
We fight, yeah.
We had a good run, buddy. Prepare to die.
Which I think is a very
Okay.
different audience than people got listening in. So yeah, let's cover whatever you think they want to hear. Let's be good gladiators and give the people what they want.
well,
Chris,
you
you
know,
take it. It's
sometimes
too long ago for me.
Well,
Cool, man.
I mean,
Yeah,
not-
it
not- I
seems
mean,
like
someone's
only
gotta survive.
yesterday.
I mean, you're not.
I
I
got contacted by Roddenberry Entertainment. It was another mutual. It's all like mutual friendships, I think, because Paul Morrissey
So let's jump back in time.
was
How did
an
you get
editor
together
over
for
there,
work?
and
Work
he
being a project you
recommended
guys
me
worked on that I
for the
mentioned
book.
before, 4 years ago. How did
And
that
Paul was my
pairing come
editor
about?
at Boom on Toy Story.
Too long ago for me.
And yeah, it was.
Yesterday.
I was familiar enough with Roddenberry Entertainment because they had done that Days Missing book, and
It was
I
That
was
was
like,
good. That was the Phil
Yeah.
Hester stuff, right?
Yeah.
Paul Morrissey.
But yeah, basically they approached me and Aubrey separately. So they approached me about doing the art for the book, and then approached Aubrey about doing the story. I had read like an initial treatment that Aubrey had done, and I just thought it was the coolest idea for a book. It's, you know, the high concept pitch I always give people is it's like, you know, Gran Torino meets The Incredibles. So it's this like formerly badass superhero from Detroit who's sort of fallen on hard times. And he's gotten old, and you know, his powers don't work right anymore, and he's just sort of, you know, it's about him sort of getting his groove back, I guess. But Aubrey's take on it had like a lot of really great sort of character moments in it, and a lot of sensitivity to the characters, and got me like real excited to work on it. And so, and it was also cool to work, you know, on a graphic novel project. So, you know, something that wasn't necessarily going to be released in individual issues. You know, to actually get to tell, you know, a beginning to end kind of story. You know, really appealed to me, and yeah, so we were sort of off to the races, but we had a great time working together. And
moments in it, and a lot of sensitivity to the characters, and
yeah, I mean, we just had a really great time, and
it was also cool to work.
Aubrey, how long were you living out in LA?
I moved out in 2012, and the book came out in 2013. Is that right?
I think so. So had you just moved to LA?
I think I just moved to LA by the time I started writing the script for it. Like, I think I had done like outlines and pitches and stuff, but once I got to scripting, it was out here. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was kind of cool
after-
though,
after it was
because
done,
we
was it one
eventually
of you
got
was
to like
like, hey,
hang
we need to do
out.
this
Like
again.
we
We
met
need
up a
to
couple
work
times to
together
talk
again.
about the book, and even after we did some signings, and yeah, it was after that.
You came to see wrestling with me.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Aubrey invited me out to a Lucha Underground taping, which is super fun. And that's before all this stuff even started.
I just moved to LA by the time I started writing the script for it. Like, I think I had outlines and pitches. And
Yeah,
stuff.
it's like
Once I got
season
scripting, it was out
1,
here.
episode 22 or something like that, where like you could see our goofy asses in the front
we met
row.
up a couple times to talk about the book, and even after we did some signings, and yeah, it was after that.
You came to see wrestling with me.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Aubrey invited me out to a Lucha Underground taping, which is super fun, and that's before all this stuff even started.
And you guys were visible on camera, right? If I'm not mistaken for that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Season 1, episode 22 or something like that, where like you could see our goofy asses in the front row.
So that kind of not pushed you, but brought you to the comic book story of professional wrestling.
It started off
this
as
is,
a Raw after show.
Because
Like
I
that's
know
how
a lot
it began.
Of
It's called
backstory,
Straight
but
Shoot,
I don't
and
know if
then
people listening do, so,
it slowly morphed
I'll
into
just
other stuff.
capsulize it and
Started
say
covering
this was
other
a project that
promotions
was
and doing
brought
retro
to
stuff,
you,
like watching
Aubrey,
older
and then you
shows and
brought
talking
Chris
about that.
into it,
And
but
always with different guests.
I can't
so I always
imagine
tried
it
to
being
get a
done
lot of
by
wrestlers on. So a lot of
two
people you
different
see
people
on
because
on
you
NXT
both are
now, like
longtime
Roderick
professional
Strong,
wrestling
Tommaso
fans.
Ciampa,
Aubrey, you had
Chris
a
Hero,
podcast for
Shayna
years,
Baszler, Adam
dissecting
Cole.
Raw, right? Regularly,
These were
Monday
all
nights?
guests that I would have on all the time because they were still working on the indie scene. And even Shayna, before she even started professional wrestling, because she's trained as a catch wrestler, like for MMA. But and I would have on wrestlers and comedians and actors and musicians and writers and generally anybody who I thought would be interesting to listen to, right, to talk about wrestling. And we would deep dive, and it was all about the approach we were talking about earlier, just this, like that was my. There's so many podcasts. There's so many wrestling podcasts. There are even more now, but there were a ton back then too. And most of them were what we were talking about earlier. They are criticism, but not actual criticism. They are just complaints. They're just lists of things people don't like and reasons why something sucks. And I found that miserable. I just found it exhausting, and it's not what I wanted to do. And that just wasn't a podcast that I would want to listen to. And it would have exhausted me to try and do that myself. And so the goal with Street Shoot was always exactly what we were talking about earlier. It was find stuff we like, talk about why it's good, and analyze why it works and what about it makes it so good. And being able to do that with professional wrestlers, people who I really respect and were really smart and generous with their time and their knowledge enough to talk with me about it was super educational. Like I thought I really understood wrestling. Like when I started the podcast, that's why I started it. But like about 6 or 8 months in, I realized, oh shit, I didn't really get it. But now I do. Like having talked to people who do this for a living and like having them explain stuff to me and really get into the really get into the weeds on why stuff works and why it doesn't. Like that's what did it for me. And it was it was talking about why things work, not talking about why things suck. So it's a testament to that approach, I think.
About 6 or 8 months in, I realized, oh shit, I didn't really get it.
Never.
Yeah.
I hope there's not hard feelings, but
it didn't occur to either of us. No, I enjoyed listening to the show. I didn't necessarily feel like a burning need to be a part of the show.
Pretty deep dive stuff. I think by the time we were working on this,
I'm a fan of wrestling, but I'm not as hardcore as Aubrey is. So.
I think by the time we started working on this, it was primarily a New Japan show, and like now New Japan stuff is in like the website's well translated, and they do like most of the shows are like they have English commentary and stuff too.
I enjoyed listening to the show.
Even like a year ago, New Japan was a lot harder to watch for American audiences. Also, man, Chris was pretty busy with this thing. Chris kind of had a lot on his plate once he started going on this. Right?
Yeah. I'll leave it at that. Yes,
yeah, man. Like
I did.
I don't know. Like it wouldn't have really made sense for me to say, "Hey, Chris, first, why don't you watch this 4-hour Japanese wrestling match that you don't know anybody in it, and then put your thoughts together and come ready to do like a deep dive, critical engagement with this material for an hour and a half next week." I don't know. It didn't seem like a good use of time to me.
I mean, I would have done it, but. Yeah, it wouldn't. It would have been to the detriment of the book.
Chris, you have a full-time job as well.
It would have really made sense
to
me to say, hey, Chris, first, why don't you watch this 4-hour Japanese wrestling match that you don't know
170.
And then put your thoughts together.
Is it 170 total, or is it?
Yeah, it's 170 total art pages, and then like also like index and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Next week. It didn't seem like a good use of time.
Yeah. I mean, I would have done it.
Yeah, that was all of it. Yep. All of it included. Yeah.
So, Chris, you have a full-time job as well, right?
Yeah.
And so you were doing the art for this, 170 something?
Yeah, and Chris didn't get started until July.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, really, it was. So is that Aubrey and I are talking about the book and about what it was like to work on the book, but we also were joined by a lot of people on the art team. So.
The fact that it was only
so between like our colorists, we had the Len O'Grady, who I worked with on Sidekick.
Seemed like a miracle.
Alan Pasalacqua, Brad Simpson, my brother Jay Moreno colored a few pages. We had Russ Wooten on letters, but also I was able to rely pretty heavily on my studio, the Garage Art Studios guys. So like Dennis Culver and people like that to sort of help me out, as we were sort of going along. But yeah, it was pretty much just me every day. As soon as I got out of work, going to the studio and just cranking for like another 8 hours. I was basically working 16-hour days, just to get it all squared away. But yeah, I mean, it's also one of those things where like Dennis Culver. It wasn't wasted time. You know what I mean? Like it was like every minute was sort of spent working on the book. It's like, and also getting to watch like 4 hours of Ric Flair promos, to try and get all the reference I needed. It really wasn't drudgery. I mean, just to get it all what's that squared away. But yeah, I mean, it's also one of those things. Sure. But I could keep those going in the background and stuff, but yeah, I mean, it does sound like a lot of work, but I think, the big takeaway is that, like, I mean, this was a blast to work on. So, and I don't think, I talked about it with Aubrey a lot, that I don't think there's any other project that I would have sort of felt like devoting this much time to,
rabbit holes of all sorts of other things, like
because I had sort of taken a break from comics for a little while, just because I was busy doing the day job. So, when he came to me about working on the book, it was one of those things where he wasn't really twisting my arm to work on this kind of thing. So yeah.
And I don't think,
Chris put a obscene amount of work. Like, I feel like even now Chris is underselling how much work he put into this thing. It was obscene. And I, hour-wise, like what I did on it can't even compare. It doesn't hold a candle to what Chris did. But I think both of us felt like I know coming in for me, like I came in really arrogant. I had never written nonfiction before, but I was in the middle of my G.I. Joe run while I was writing this book, and I was like, I was thinking in my head, I was like, I can read G.I. Joe pretty fast, and like just think about like how long it takes me to write an issue, and like I worked out in my head how long it was going to take to write this thing, and I got 4 pages in and said, oh no, oh no, this is so much more difficult. But I think we talked about it a lot throughout. This thing's meant to be an evergreen, right? This is not disposable entertainment, and I don't mean that disparagingly, because if you're a wrestling fan, you know all about disposable entertainment, right? And like there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, there's something great about serialized storytelling where you watch it and you enjoy it in the moment, and then you're on to the next one, right? And like that's how a lot of comics are too, and it's great, and I love that. But that's not what this is. This is something that's meant to stay on the shelves and to have a long tail. And we wrote and drew and created and worked with all our collaborators in such a way that this thing hopefully will stand the test of time, and this can be a reference point for people for years to come. And so I don't know, like it was like even while I was like I had about 3.5 months to write this thing, and it was brutal, man. Like just all the. For like 170 pages, like that's the thing. I was like, for 170 pages, that's not bad. I can do that, stand on my head. And then I realized, oh my God, like even though like, I've read all these books, I've got like a bookshelf full of reference and stuff like that. Like I ended up having to go find a lot more, just dates and specifics and who people were facing and what they were wearing and chronologies and stuff like that. And it was, it was all consuming, but it was. I agree with Chris, man. Like it wasn't drudgery, and it felt worth it even then, because it's nothing like this exists in any medium, right? Not just in comics, but there's no documentary that covers all of wrestling history. There's not even a book. There's not even a book that covers all of it. There's books that cover
dates, specifics, who people were facing, what they were wearing, and chronologies, stuff like that. And it was, it was all consuming. But it was, I agree with Chris, man. Like it wasn't drudgery.
There's no overview.
Felt worth it.
There's no overview. Yeah, and like so this was like this is gonna be the first one, and I want it to be the best one. I want it to be. I didn't want it to come out and people be like, oh shit, well I guess we've got room to do a better version of this. No, I wanted this to come out and people be like, well, we never need to write about wrestling ever again.
Books that are just holes in a certain subject
it's
matter.
done.
Like, oh,
Aubrey
you want to know what it's like to train at this dojo? You can get a book about that. You want to know a little bit about
Sure.
New Japan, you get a book about that. But nothing.
Man, I would. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just got finished telling you what a nightmare it was to write this thing, like all the research and everything. But man, I'd love to. I would love to, like, especially doing all these interviews and stuff, like, because there are a lot of things that got left on the cutting room floor and developments that have happened since I finished writing this book. That at the time I didn't really have the historical perspective to talk about, but now I would a little bit, you know. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe one day I'd love to.
Yeah.
I just got finished telling you what a nightmare it was to write this thing, like all the research and everything. But man, I'd love to. I would love to, like, especially doing all these interviews and stuff, like, because there are a lot of things that got left on the cutting room floor and developments that have happened since I finished writing this book.
I think there is a big overlap with wrestling and comic fans. I think the similarities between wrestling and comics are pretty shallow and surface level, and maybe even a little bit overblown. Because I think fundamentally they're really different mediums. And I do think wrestling is its own medium. Like, I don't think it's just a genre of TV show, right? I think it's its own thing that exists by, and I don't even think it's theater. Like, I know that's a line people say too, like, oh, it's live action theater that they put on TV. No, it operates by different rules, and it has different metrics for success. I think that, you know, there are all the things that people talk about, you know, these, like, it's wrestling is live action superheroes and morality plays and serialized storytelling and soap opera and stuff like that, and that does have a lot in common with superhero books, but the metrics for success are totally different. And this is a thing that we go into, like, this is one of the big theses of the book, is that wrestling's a con. Wrestling at its core is a trick. It's a shell game. It's a magic trick. It's a confidence game. It's all, you know, it has its origins in carnivals, in carnival games, and bookies, like unscrupulous bookies in on it with the promoter and the wrestler. Like, that's the origin of wrestling. So while comics, you know, and television and novels and movies are written and created with a goal of character arcs and plot development and story and exploring themes and metaphors and all this, like, high-minded college boy stuff, which I love.
Sure.
Wrestling doesn't care. Wrestling only sees that stuff as a means to an end, which on one level is getting to the fight and giving you an exciting fight, but really the real goal is just getting you to pay money to come back next week, you know. And I think that that's a core difference. So I think that there is a lot of overlap with fans, but that's one of the things that, like, that was one of the goals for the book, honestly, was to really explore why wrestling is different and what makes it unique from everything else in existence, except for maybe, like, 3-card Monty and carnival games. and magic tricks, right? Like, those are what I think are most similar to wrestling.
You to pay money to come back next week.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a core difference. So I think that there is a lot of overlap with fans, but that's one of the things, like, that was one of the goals for the book, honestly, was to really explore why wrestling is different and what makes it unique from everything else in existence, except for maybe, like, 3-card Monty and
totally. I mean, I think that's really at the heart of modern wrestling fandom is, you know, there's like an old con man saying is you can't con an honest John. And what that means is if you're going to con somebody, if you're going to trick somebody, you get their money from them. If you're going to defraud another human being, they have to think that they're the one doing the defrauding, right? Like, if you look at, like, classic confidence games, right, and like con man stuff, it's all about making the person that you're conning think that they're getting one over on you, and that they're the one getting the original deal. And so, like, that's the thing. They have to be complicit in it. They have to be complicit in this con. And wrestling's the same way. You have, at a certain level, you have to be willing to go along with it. And, you know, at one level, there's the kid who believes that it's real and just loses their minds as soon as the pyro starts going off and the wrestler comes out and they're hitting each other. And at the other far end of the extreme, there's the person on message boards and Reddit and reading dirt sheets and opining on Twitter and thinking that they know the backstage stuff and like who the promoters like and who they hate and like where people are gonna go and like what the storylines are, like, and they think they're in on it, but they're really not. Like that's it's the same thing. They think they know, but they don't, and wrestling uses that at every level. It's beautiful.
Going off, and the wrestler comes out and they're hitting each other. And at the other far end of the extreme, there's the person on message boards and Reddit reading dirt sheets and opining on Twitter, thinking that they know the backstage stuff and like who the
Chris,
like and who they hate and like.
Gosh, that's a weird. That's. I think it's an interesting question for me because I don't remember there being a time where like that illusion was shattered for me. I feel like for me it was just a sort of transition,
fans, do you
into somewhat of a deeper understanding about it. I guess
it was real and lost your mind over
because
it.
I mean, for me it didn't.
Finding out,
well, here's the thing. I think
really
for a lot of times that question gets asked. I think the idea is that it's like learning Santa Claus isn't real. That like somehow that was like the end of my innocence, but like I feel like with all the other things as with all the other things that I like that wasn't the thing that really got me into it.
Chris, what was the end of your innocence?
The end of my innocence, from a wrestling standpoint, or just in general?
Just life.
Oh gosh, I don't know, man. It's hard to say. I feel like that's for another podcast.
Yeah, we'll save that.
I mean, for wrestling, the movie Ready to Rumble probably was the end of my innocence.
It ruined it.
Yeah. But no, I mean, like that's the thing. Like it's that Apple Jacks commercial. They don't taste like apples. It's like who gives a crap, Dad? Go back to mowing the lawn. That's not the draw. So like for me, like I don't remember a time where I was just like, oh, this is fake, because that wasn't really what I felt. I fell out of wrestling more when I just there wasn't a lot there that was sort of grabbing me. So, like if we're talking just strictly like WWE stuff, my favorite wrestlers weren't necessarily the big like Triple H type dudes. I liked the fast talkers. I liked the motor mouths. And it at a time when The Rock was like leaving to go do movies and things like that, like a lot of my interest was starting to wane because the characters that I like to see I wasn't seeing a lot of. But then I started getting bigger into the Lucha Libre stuff. So you know what I mean? It was sort of like I just sort of like just moved around to the things that I got into.
When I was a kid, I remember really vividly being at my cousin's house and like wrestling was on, and I was like, oh, wrestling, and they're like, oh, it's fake, right? I was like, what do you mean? And they said, you see, like watch him throw the punch. Watch him do the punch. And they were still doing like the old like kind of like almost like I call it like a Memphis punch, because it's like it's very like it's what Jerry Lawler does, and like Jeff Jarrett does it too. It's like the wind up stomping punch, and I love it now. It's one of my favorite things. But like at the time, I was like, holy shit, they're stomping the mat to make that noise. That isn't the noise of a man being punched in the head. That's not what it sounds like. And that floored me. I don't know. I was probably like 6 or 7. I don't know. I was young. And they said that, and then so here's the best part. They told me, yeah, and when there's blood, it's because they have vials of chicken blood that they conceal, and they smash them on each other, which isn't true. And like, so that's the most beautiful. And it's like a perfect example I was just talking about. It's even in thinking what's really going on, you don't. You have no idea, right? Like that used to be like I think like with the internet and like everything, like this is thankfully gone away as like a myth of wrestling. No one in the history of wrestling has ever kept a vial of chicken blood concealed on them, especially because it's so much easier to just use a razor and slice your head open. Like that's so simple than carrying around vials of chicken blood. But yeah, that was I believed that for years.
No idea, right? Like
chicken blood.
That used to be like I think like with the internet and like everything like
different podcasts
gone away as like a myth of wrestling. No one in the history of wrestling has ever kept a vial of chicken blood concealed on them, especially because it's so much easier to just use a razor and slice your head open.
Yeah,
like that's so simple. To carry around vials of chicken blood. But yeah, that was I believed that for years.
Well, if we went into all the different wrestling rumors that aren't true, that'd be a whole different podcast entirely.
Different podcast.
For me, as a wrestling fan, I wrestled in high school. I was captain of my wrestling team, and I wasn't a big fan of professional wrestling. I thought it kind of made a mockery of what I was doing, you know, my real sport, even though, as you point out, pro wrestling is the one true sport. But I started living with my brother after I graduated college, and this was right around WrestleMania 10 was my first WrestleMania, and it was amazing. There were, you know, a ladder match and Macho Man and Crush with false count, like not false count anywhere, but you had 30 seconds to get back into the ring after that, and Yokozuna and all sorts of great stuff on that card. And that's when I started to get into it. But it wasn't until I read an interview with Diamond Dallas Page about a feud he was having at the time with Mark Merrow, not Mark Merrow, with Johnny B. Bad. That's who he was back in WCW. And that's for the listeners, not for you, of course, you know that. And it was when he'd said, like, yeah, you know, I don't mind doing the job for him because he does it for me. And I thought, wait, what?
Yeah, I think the line is fixed.
And that's
not
when
I
was an adult and already working several years in comic retail at that point. When
you just say, no, it's fixed, like boxing or MMA.
It's not direct competition every time. Okay. Huh. And that opened up my view for everything. But yeah, I was considerably older than the average wrestling fan when they realized that things are, because it's certainly not fake. But you know, I think
the line is fixed, not fake.
Okay.
You were one of them.
Whenever someone says, you know, it's fake, I'm like, no, it's real. I've seen it. It exists. It's a thing in this world.
You just say, no, it's fixed, like boxing, right?
Yeah, and I asked my social media friends and followers and people I know from all over the country and stuff for suggestions and stores that they dig and like and that they would like to have it at, because that's always like,
up to when it was
you know, that's a good in. You know, like I talked to your normal like pull list customer so and so.
I was,
and they said that you should carry this book. I also just called stores that I knew had a big presence in their cities or like had big online presence, and yeah, man, I just made a huge list and started calling
people I know from all over the country and stuff for suggestions and stores that they dig and like and that they would like to have it at, because that's always like, you know, that's a good in.
Sure.
I talked to your normal like pull list customer so and so, and they said that you should carry this book. I also just called stores that I knew had a big presence in their cities or like had big online presence. And
it kind of ran the gamut, man. Most people were pretty excited because, you know, even if the person, even if the store owner wasn't a huge comics fan, they're either
comics is such a weird industry because you have
some of them are comics fans
do one thing 3,000 different ways. So I mean, you probably got, you know, 250 different responses from people.
Some of them weren't wrestling fans, but you know, their employees were, and their customers were. You know, they see people coming in with wrestling T-shirts. They hear people talking about the wrestling events of that week. You know, like when they're buying their books, and so they know that there is this. The smart ones did, I think.
Although no, I smart retailer. I absolutely believe that.
There are a ton of wrestling. Just look at the numbers, man. Like there are an enormous amount of wrestling fans. Wrestling is humongously popular always, and especially right now. And so I think most of the retailers were super into it because they said, oh, that's something I can sell. I know right off bat, you know, 2 or 3 people who will buy this thing. And then I kind of tried to impart to people too that, you know, the book, it's designed, you know, it is designed to stoke the nostalgia of hardcore fans and lapsed fans, right? And to fill in the blanks in people's knowledge base. Because wrestling's like comics, too. People will drop out for 2 or 3 years. They'll come back. They'll drop out again. It's not uncommon. And so everybody's got gaps in their knowledge, right? So it's designed to fill in those gaps, but it's also designed to work as a primer, you know? So even, you know, people – and what I told people, too, is, you know, like I guarantee everybody buying Hip Hop Family Tree isn't a diehard hip hop head, right? This book's the same way, you know, like it's for people who like learning about kind of like a distinctly American form of pop culture entertainment, you know, and like this, it's Americana. It really is. You know, I think that's one of the things like Cody Rhodes said on the back of the book. Yeah, he called it one of the last great forms of Americana. And I think that's true. And I think that there's a lot of interest in wrestling as this unique art form, especially with its gaining popularity. And, my hope, and I've heard this from a few people already, Chris and I's mutual friend Howard Chaykin, hates wrestling. Hates it. Dude, Robert Kirkman, too. Robert Kirkman, in his quote on the back, those guys hate wrestling, but they really dug the book. They really liked it because it allowed them to understand what it is that people love about wrestling.
Great forms of Americana, and I think that's true. And I think that there's a lot of interest in wrestling as this unique art form, especially with gaining popularity. My hope, and I've heard this from a few people already. Our Chris and I's mutual friend Howard Chaykin hates wrestling. Hates it. Dude, Robert Kirkman, too. Robert Kirkman, in his quote on the back.
Yeah, it was him, Joe Manganiello, and some other huge dude, wasn't it? It was a lot of on display. I remember seeing some of that.
What it is that people do love about wrestling.
Yeah, like, for example, I don't play Dungeons and Dragons, but the popularity of it right now is insane in the number of podcasts and shows. And just this morning, I briefly watched a video where Big Show was taking part in a live D&D campaign.
Yeah, it was him, Joe Manganiello, and some huge dude, wasn't it?
Yep.
On display. I remember seeing some of that.
I think that you're right about the book being a perennial, and
who else has action figures?
Challengers is lucky enough that I consider us kind of a wrestling store because we have a lot of wrestlers that shop with us and a lot of very vocal. Yeah, it really is, and we've got
Buffy's wrestling. Buffy's wrestling. Buffy counts as we're claiming that too.
Anybody who comes in and has an action figure of them and they've been in the store, I'll buy one and put it up on the shelf, and our shelf is 90% wrestlers. I mean. There's a couple, but I mean, having a master's action. Amber Benson from Buffy the Vampire Slayer has done like 8 signings with us, and then Anya from Buffy has been in as well. So it's just all pop culture. Yeah,
Buffy's wrestling. Buffy counts, but we're claiming that.
Fair enough. But then there's so many like young wrestlers, or like I'm still waiting for the mass-produced Cassius Ohno doll so I can put him on the shelf because Chris Hero's been in. And finally the Young Bucks have figures out. I'm like, they were in years ago. I can put the Bucks on the shelf. But the great thing about this book, and I do want to mention that 10 Speed Press. This is part of a series that they do, the comic book story.
Awesome, that's great to hear.
Yeah, that's great. It's a very substantial book. I mean, it looks good wrapped.
The wrestling one,
like it really looks like something.
Immediately, and I told Challenger's co-owner Dal that so far this is our big Christmas book.
Oh yeah, I don't know what those are called either.
We want to have a good gift
Patrick, did you see
for people that are looking for something for somebody. And some years we don't have, like, there isn't something that's out, but this is one of the first ones.
That's my favorite thing when people take pictures and post it, and they get like the lights just right, so it reflects off the spot glass. Ooh, it does something to me.
Yeah, I mean,
that's for a different podcast too. What specifically it does for me? We'll save that for something else.
What spot gloss does for Aubrey Sitterson.
Yeah.
The spot varnish? Oh yeah, of course, yeah. You don't miss
what a great deal.
Yeah.
People should go out and buy one right now.
The belt and the flashes.
When people take pictures and post it, and they get like the lights just right.
The glare, yeah.
Reflects off the spot glass. Ooh, it does something to me.
And it's only
that's for a different podcast too.
Well, it was it was supposed to be October 3rd, and I'm not sure. Like it's the on sale date, because comic book stores put things on sale on Wednesdays, and
really
bookstores put things on sale on Tuesdays, and so it was supposed to be October 2nd and October 3rd. It was all supposed to be out.
Yeah, right. Well,
last
here's
week.
the annoying thing that you and I talked about briefly.
I don't know.
Is that
I think it would take
on sale date was October 10th.
a more learned man than me to fully understand
on sale date for
diamond shipping dates, but it got bumped, and so it's out right now. But here's what I like about that. You got that we're living in that long tail, Daddy. We got another week of promoting and talking about this thing, and people stumble across their book in their comic book stores. And I think that even with my 250 retailer calls, people didn't order enough of this thing. It's already back. It's as of yesterday, right? The day it went on sale, it was back ordered at Diamond. And there are more copies.
So it's out right now.
Yeah, man, there are more copies out there. Diamond should be getting more. If I was Diamond, I would order a bazillion. Mr. Diamond, I believe, is the owner. Mr. Diamond, if you're listening, or Ms. Diamond, I forget. It's a couple. And if you're, they should be ordering ordering
calls.
more. They exist. It's not like it's not sold out. It's not unavailable places. But yeah, put in those orders because
right, the day it went on sale, it was back ordered at Diamond.
Yes, as we were talking, I looked it up.
Yeah,
it
man,
is.
there are more copies out there. Diamond should be getting more. If I was Diamond.
Well, there's Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com.
Yeah, I know. I hate to drive people away from comic book shops, especially on a podcast for a comic book.
They should be ordering more. They exist. It's not like it's not sold out. It's not unavailable places. But put in those orders.
Some retailers also, and I don't know the specifics of it, but some retailers set up direct accounts with the publisher because it's through Penguin Random House. It's not like 10 Speed is part of Penguin Random House, so it's not like it's not like some penny ante like fly by night publishing operation, right? They're a big deal. So like
you don't have to because there are so many more distributors that stores can order from.
Even and Diamond should be getting more. Again, I can't imagine they would want to leave all of this money, all this filthy lucre on the table from selling these things.
So retailers set up direct accounts with the publisher because it's through Penguin Random House. It's not like 10 Speed is part of Penguin Random House.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
It's not like some penny.
I have, yeah.
By night publishing operation, right? They're a big deal. So people can. You can get this book places. I'm
gonna have to come back and I'm gonna have to draw on the wall again. Absolutely.
I imagine like David Hasselhoff playing while y'all like bust down that wall.
Yes, there's no way they can do that.
That's a real dated reference.
That'd be fools.
That's a real dated reference.
Chris Moreno has actually been to the store back when there was a Winnipeg Comic Con back in the early.
Need a metal hard hat.
2009, and you'd signed our wall at the time, but we broke through and expanded a little bit, so we lost where you had signed our wall.
So
you have to do it again.
On the wall again.
Absolutely. Aubrey, you and I have never actually met.
Like David Hasselhoff playing while y'all like bust down that wall.
Well, it was a cinder block.
I love to imagine those guys running.
Big undertaking just to get a small cutout away.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Aubrey, you and I have never met. Yeah. Oh no, it covered just cutting through that small 2 foot by 6 foot or 3 foot by 6 foot section of drywall made the store uninhabitable for the day. So much dust. All the 4-star guys were in that day, and they like ran out into the street getting covered in drywall dust.
I love to imagine those guys running.
Okay, let's say walking a little bit quicker.
There you go.
I don't know. I feel like we're coming to the end of this, but don't know if I plugged the book enough. But Aubrey was nice enough to send me a PDF a few months before it came out, and I got to read it that way, and it's amazing. And the scale that it covers, and even though I've been a wrestling fan for a very long time, I barely knew a small percentage of
it's like eight wrestlers to a panel in some places. It's jam packed. I mean, not just that, we got like weird cameos and I've thrown in some I've thrown in some Easter eggs from wrestling lore.
Some people have found. I don't think all of them have been found yet.
We've actually just today we saw a couple people like spot some things that haven't been mentioned yet. But yeah, there's a lot in there.
Yeah, there's like eight wrestlers to a panel in some places.
Chris, you want to go first?
You can find me at Chris Moreno 121 on Twitter, Chris Moreno _121 on Instagram, because apparently there was a Chris Moreno 121. I thought I picked a number that was far enough down the line that there wouldn't be another one, but who knows. And then you can find me like on Facebook, The Art of Chris Moreno.
They can follow you on the internet.
And then, I'm usually hanging around at any of those places.
You can find me at Chris Moreno 121.
That's right.
Twitter.
Yeah, and I'm Aubrey Sitterson on everything. AubreySitterson. AubreySitterson.com is my website. I got links to all my social media there. Ways to buy the book, see my other books, upcoming shows and stuff like that. I'm going to be at Virginia Comic Con a little bit later this month. So if you're in the Richmond area, come out for that, please. It'd be great to see you. Tell me you heard me on this wonderful podcast. I'm on Twitter, on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. It's all Aubrey Sitterson, except for Facebook, because I shut down my author page and just switched it over all to my personal page. And my author page, I used Aubrey Sitterson. So my personal page is Charles Aubrey's. It's facebook.com/Charles. I have a very fancy boy name. I'm very proud of it. But yeah, you just search for Aubrey Sitterson. There's not a whole lot of us around. You'll be able to find it.
I'm on Twitter, on Facebook, I'm on Instagram. It's all Aubrey Sitterson, except for Facebook.
Oh, it was excellent.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah.
We sold a I don't know, an upsettingly large amount of these things. Yeah, dude, we sold a lot of them. Like even the store owner Ed was like startled. I think by how many of these things we sold like ahead of time, because we're selling signed ones through his website, and then also just walk-ins. He had to order more. Like the week of the signing, he was like, guys, I'm running out of these things. I have to put another order. So yeah, it went great. It was awesome having Christopher Daniels there too, because first of all, because that guy rules, and he's just a great wrestler and a really nice guy. Yeah, he gets it. But also because a lot, like people at that signing and people who had ordered books through Ed up to that point got a head start on something that I think is going to be one of the coolest things to see about this book, because there are so many wrestlers in this thing, and Chris drew so many awesome, amazing wrestlers doing awesome, amazing stuff. I'm excited for people to start getting the wrestlers themselves to autograph their appearances. Yeah. And Chris signed his appearances for everybody there and for all the pre-orders that we had gotten in as well. So those folks get a little head start on that. They get a little surprise when they're flipping through it and they find a Christopher Daniels signature right next to his appearance.
Yep. Chris drew so many awesome, amazing wrestlers doing awesome, amazing stuff. I'm excited for people to start getting the wrestlers themselves to autograph their.
Oh yeah, this
really?
I mean,
cool.
Oh yeah.
And Chris signed his appearances for everybody there and for all the pre-orders that we had gotten in.
That's amazing. He's the real deal. He gets it.
Head start on that. They get a little surprised when they're flipping through it and they find a Christopher Daniels signature right next to his appearance.
Nice. Yep. We actually have hanging up in Challengers a page of original art of Cloak and Dagger drawn by a very, very young Christopher Daniels. He
I guess you just have to have us back sometime.
And there's times when he's in the store just shopping.
The
and
only
someone
solution.
asks me a question, he will answer it before I can.
That's amazing.
That guy is a long-time comic fan. Well, I feel bad that we didn't get a chance to dive into.
I'm waiting for the comic book story of comic books, because I feel like that's officially the snake eating its tail.
Fred Van Lente and Brian Dunleavy, they do
in the industry.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, man, it's good. You should check it out.
I'll check it out.
I've loved those guys since Action Philosophers.
I
remember when that was coming out. Yeah, it's like a similar approach.
When you do the
cool.
The comic book story of
then I'll preserve that. I'll take that.
Van Lente's territory, bro.
I'm gonna put that in my pocket.
Story of comic books, because I feel like
crumple it up, throw it in the trash.
The snake eating its tail.
Thank you, Patrick.
There kind of is that though.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm glad you like it.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Good. You should check it out.
Cool, man.
That was awesome.
I love those.
Thanks, brother. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah. It's like a similar approach. It's good.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Then I'll reserve.
Cool, man. You were the last interview on my schedule right now. I'm sure others will pop up, but or no, I guess we have one next week, don't we, Chris?
Hey,
that
you guys,
radio show.
So much. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks for doing this book. This book is amazing.